Hello and welcome back to my craft room. I have been doing some more work on my Mini-finity book. I've done quite a bit of experimenting and found various different ways to do it. I know what's going to be my favourite, but I think different people might prefer it in different ways. Let me just quickly show you what I've got in store for this video. I'm going to timestamp the whole thing so you can skip through to the bits you want, because I think it might turn out to be quite long, and it might be handy if you're working through the project to be able to come back to certain parts. So I'm going to timestamp the whole thing. If you're not aware, you can, if you look along the bottom of the video, you might need to hover over it or click on it or do a long press on it if you're depending on what device you're looking at. But you'll see little notches all along the bottom of the timeline at the bottom of the video, and you can click on any of them to go straight to that part. And then it'll also bring up chapters down the side. Also, if you go down into the description box, you'll see all of the timestamps in there, and you can click on one of them as well. Let's just go to my desk and have a quick look, and then I'm going to pass you over to my previous self. So this was the first kind of, what's the word, prototype Mini-finity book that I did. It's a bit floppy. I think it will get sturdier as I stitch into it more, but it is quite floppy. So I'm still going to be working on that. That won't be wasted, but I think I've found the way I really prefer. So the first thing I did was to make a new and improved template, and in a minute I'll pass over to my previous self, who will tell you all about how to use this template. And then I transferred the template onto a fabric with the idea that you could work on it flat and then fold it up into your book. Then I tried making it into a book first to then work on it when it's already assembled. I think that's for me that's a little bit awkward, but it would mean that you wouldn't have to worry about any of the numbers and things, so it might be much easier. But my final method was doing something similar to this, recreating this structure which has got, it'll be decorated on both sides. What I did was reinforce it with card and make the whole thing much sturdier, and I made it up as separate little squares, which will be a lot easier to work on. And here it is so far. Oh, that's not open properly just because I haven't properly assembled it yet. Because what I'm going to do is work on it flat like this before I assemble it. But some people might prefer to just have the whole thing already assembled. You wouldn't have to worry about any of the numbers or anything. Anyway, I'm going to pass back to my former self now, who will explain everything you need to know. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it useful. Please do ask questions if you don't understand anything, because I know it can be quite difficult to follow this kind of thing, and it's also quite difficult to explain. This was my first kind of prototype. The idea is that I will create a little envelope for it, have some more scrap, we'll have a little button closure, and it'll open up like this. Some people might remember doing these in paper if you've ever been into card making and scrapbooking. I thought it would be fun to do a stitched version, but I think I've found a new and improved way to do it, which will be easier to work on. It'll take a little bit longer, but it will be easier to work on, and it will be a bit more kind of sturdy and robust, I think. So that was my first prototype. This is the new and improved template. You could, if I just get my hands out of the way, you could just pause the video now. I showed how to do the basic template before. You just need to start with a square of paper. Any size is fine. I wouldn't try and go too small because it'll get too fiddly. And then you just fold it in half, turn it, fold it in half the other. It's very easy. It's very easy to do. I explained that in the last video, which I will link to here. Now I've put these numbers here to enable you to work out where each of these squares is going to fall within the finished book, so that you can plan it if you want to put certain colours on each of these pages. If I call this block of 4 squares a page. If you don't mind it being random, you don't have to worry about the numbers at all. Just have fun and just do it completely at random. When you make your template, it's important to remember that there are 2 sides to it. There's this side, then you need to turn it over, make sure you keep it the same way up, and copy that side as well. And the reason it looks like I've drawn the 1s upside down and the 2s on their side, that is the way up that they will appear in the finished book. It will make sense, I promise you. As I say, if you don't mind which way up they turn out, don't even worry about it. Where the X's are, so if I turn this now, where the X's are, that's where you're not going to do any stitching or anything, because those two faces are going to be attached together. And I'm going to use a glue stick and then stitch it. So you need to leave them plain. The reason I put the other complicated looking bits here, where I put the arrows, these points will end up in the centre. So say this was my page 3. This square is that one. I know it's that one because I put a dot in the top left hand corner, top left hand corner, top right hand, bottom right hand, bottom left hand. This is the bottom left hand, so that would be this square. Where I put the arrow, that's pointing towards where the centre will appear. So this square will be there, the centre is there, the centre is there. Where I've put this is half a heart shape, and I picked a heart shape because it can only go one way up, so I thought it was a good shape to pick. So say you wanted some kind of a motif to end up in the middle here, say it was a house or a heart or a butterfly or a circle, whatever it might be, this is how you'll need to place it. So the sort of top left section of whatever that motif is will need to go in this corner of that square. I'm hoping that makes sense. I can't think of a way to make it clearer than that. So you won't need necessarily to transfer all of these markings, because some of it is not going to matter to you. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to do Blue Peter Lady and show you one I prepared earlier. So here's my fabric version of this template. So I've folded the fabric just the same as I did the paper, and I've copied all of these numbers. To me it is going to matter which way up the squares are, let's assume. So I've carefully copied my numbers over. I've done the 3s this way up, the 4s this way up, I've put my X's. I've decided I don't mind about the central, where the central motif is. As long as I know where the centre is going to be, that's all I need to know. So in each case, like here I haven't done this one yet, so this is the 3 that will go in the top left. The centre point will be here. So really, in a way, the centre point arrow, the motif and the dot to show you which square it is within the page are all kind of telling you the same information. You only really need one of them. I've included all of them because I just thought some people might find it more helpful to know where the centre is. Some people might find it more helpful to know this is the top left square, you know. So I've included them all. For me, I just want to know where the centre is going to fall. The reason it's important to mark them out and make sure that they also, when I turn over, turning over exactly the same way, just to make sure. Yep, just double checking these are all the same way up, the centres are marked, as the centre doesn't necessarily fall where you think it's going to. It took me a couple of false starts to work all this out. The reason I've done it that way is because I think it would be easier to work onto these squares, do my stitching and everything before I've folded the book. So I'm going to try it basically 3 different ways. This way I'm working on the book like this and then folding it. Then I'm going to do one where I fold the book first, which is what I did here, and then I stitched these squares on, and that wasn't too difficult. But if I actually wanted to do some more kind of slightly more complicated embroidery on these squares, it might be easier just to be able to work on them first before it's all folded up. I could also work on the squares and then stitch them on when it's all folded up. I mean, you can adapt it to, whichever way you want to work, but I want to try one with it just working on it flat like this and then folding it. That's method number 1. That's going to be. Method number 2 is going to be to fold it up first and then work on it. I'm going to make these ones that I'm making up now are going to be to send to my friend Jen. Hello, Jen. It's going to be my guinea pig. I'm dying to see what Jen will do with this. So with this one, I'm just going to quickly show you. I know I did it in the last video, but just in case someone's watching who didn't see the last video and doesn't want to go back there, let's just quickly show how I did this. You could do this with an iron. I wouldn't worry too much though, because some of these folds will end up having to fold back the other way. It's very, very simple folding, and as I say, you can start with any size. You don't really need to measure, except that you do need to know it's a proper square. I mean, you can see that's not absolutely accurate, but the more accurate you can be, the better it's going to fold up and function, your little book. So I've done those folds both ways. Now I'm folding this edge up to meet that middle fold line. And the same here. Really hope all of this is making sense. It's quite hard to explain, so if anybody's got any questions, please do ask in the comments and I'll be very happy to help. Now I've got a double line going on there because of the fold that, you know, was already in the fabric, so just need to make sure I get the right one. Okay, it's that one. Okay, so that is that. So now I've got 16 squares, 4 that way, 4 that way. Now I'm going to fold that back in half, and I'm just going to cut this middle square out. So if let's just open it up again. I'm going to cut these middle 4 squares out. The easiest way is just to fold it back in half and cut through 2 thicknesses at once. I'm just using a plain sort of medium weight, light to medium weight calico here. I think it needs to be a cotton. It just needs to be something that will crease nicely for you. I think maybe a thicker weight calico would make it more sturdy, you know. If I'm just going to fold this book up first and work on it later, I don't need to worry about all of these numbers and things. I don't need to do that. So I can still follow the template, because that will tell me where the squares need to attach. Whether I'm doing this, whether I'm starting from this side or from this side, it doesn't matter. It will work either way. Yeah, I don't need to write down the numbers. I'm going to put the crosses here just to make it easier to explain what I'm doing. So I've transferred the crosses there and there. But if I was just doing this by myself, I probably wouldn't bother. And let's turn over, make sure I do the same orientation, turn it over exactly the same way. And I'm going to just tack this with Pritt stick, because that worked quite well for me the other day. And as I say, I can start from this side or I can start from that side, it doesn't matter. What the crosses are telling me is that these 2 faces need to stick together, so those are going to stick together that way. If you're doing it in paper, you can just glue it. If you're doing it in fabric, you'll need to stitch it. Well, you could just fabric glue it, I suppose, but so that one goes to there, and this one's got to go to here. So this is an example of where I'm already folding. Some folds went in one direction, I'm now folding them back on themselves. And it might be easier just to, rather than do the next stage of folding, just to stitch now. So I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to stitch. I don't need to stitch this, I just need to stitch here, just where I've just put the glue. So that square and this square. I'm just going to run a line of stitching around the edge, Do that and I'll be back in a mo. There we go, I've just done a line of small-ish straight stitches around this one and this one. So now I'm just going to use my glue again to help me. Following my X's again, this face has got to meet this face, so fold that over. And this side. It's a little bit more tricky doing it in fabric than paper, but you know, stitching through this one is, you just have to be a little bit more careful about where you're stitching. You don't want to stitch through all the layers, just through the 2 layers that you want to attach together. So if I have a look here, I'm just going to turn this over. Because I put that dab of glue, I can see where these 2 were attached, so I know it's these 2 pieces that I've got to stitch. I don't want to stitch through that layer as well, otherwise the book won't work. So I just want to stitch around this square, just these 2 layers together. And likewise with this one, I can see those are the two surfaces that I want to attach together. So I'm just going to pick them up and I'm just going to stitch those two together. I'm not going to get this one. So let's just start doing that a minute. I mean, I guess these could just be tacking stitches which will come out in the end once you've put your decorative squares on, but I'm not one for remembering to do that, so I tend to make my little kind of tacking stitches reasonably small and neat, so that I quite like the look of them and I don't worry about taking them out, but it's up to you. You could make these very neat and tidy. I like raw edges and things, but you definitely could make it all much tidier if you wanted to. I've just done torn edges on here. So you can see, yeah, it's just a little bit more tricky, but not much. If you're doing it in paper, you just press them together and you're done. But so I'm going to fast forward now to the point where I've stitched both these squares together. Okay, so that's it. I've now stitched around those two squares, and that's really my little Mini-finity book done. The base of it's done anyway. So now I would just take some time to work through the book, opening it up at each of the pages, so you end up with 4 different pages, 4 different sets of 4 mini squares. You can also see that where, as you open it, the line comes horizontal. I always then turn it and fold it back to open it up. I just find that the easier way to do it. And after you've worked through and opened it up a few times, it sort of settles into the folds a bit better. Also, once you've then applied your decorative pieces of fabric to it, it gets a little bit more sturdy. I think it might be better in a heavier weight calico. This happens to be what I've got, and I didn't want to buy anything sort of specially. So that is my kind of second way of doing it. And probably what I would do now is cut my 16 squares, because you would need 16 decorative squares. It needs to be separate squares. Obviously you can't go across or the book won't open and function properly. I would decide if I wanted to have a central motif, a heart shape or a butterfly, whatever else, flower, whatever I want to put here. Little houses could be fun. And I would probably, doing it this way, I'd probably cut one large square, apply the motif, and then cut it into 4 and apply. Sort of, I think there are lots of different ways you could do that. This is the basis done. Now you can see why it might be easier to, hopefully it makes more sense now what I was talking about earlier on, that it might be easier to have all the pages marked out on here and work on them before you fold it into a book. So I want to try that way as well. However, you would still need to work on each decorative square, do all of the fancy stitching, and then stitch it onto here just with one wrap, because if you do all the fancy stitching through this thickness as well, it's going to come out on this side. Hopefully that's making sense. So I want to try that method too. Then I've got my third method, and I think it's going to be my favourite, and that is going to be to look at each of these as an individual square, an individual double-sided square. So this square, this will belong to page 2 on one side of it. On the back I won't do any work, because it will just have a plain back, because that's going to attach to this one. You won't see it, you won't see this. It's in effect the face that's going to be glued. Let's imagine this is number 2 page. Now, because I've marked my centres, I know that these two will fall here, because this is the centre. So say I was going to do a heart shape, that top curve of that heart shape needs to go on here, and the bottom pointy bit on the right hand side would go here. You can see that. I think I'm probably over explaining it, but I'm aware this kind of thing is quite hard to get your head around. So as I say, if there's any questions, if I'm not explaining it properly, let me know and I'll do my best to help out. Yeah, so this square will fall on page 2. It'll be this one, because I know that's the centre point, so it'll be here. And on the other side of that square I need to have number 4. the other way up, because the centre point is there, and I can see my number 4 is written that way up. Again, if there's not going to be any central motif or anything, it really doesn't matter. It might be that you don't care which way up it is, but you just want to colour coordinate, so you'll know that all your squares with number 2 on, you want to have in pink. All your squares with number 1 on, you want to have shades of yellow. You know, you might not care which way up they are at all. So, I'm going to work these as separate squares. And I could just do 2 separate squares of, I mean, I know these are much bigger squares, but for want of argument, I could just, let's say we were working on this one. I could put whatever I want. I could fully finish my decorative fabric and stitching and everything for this square on page number 2. So it'll be this one. And then this one, I would do everything I want to appear on this page. So let's say this was number 4, page number 4. This one is going to fall there because I've marked the centre and it's there. So on this square, I'd put everything that I want to appear in this part of this page. So going back to here again, I'll need to make sure that the number 2 is that way up, and the number 4 is that way up. So it's going to take a little bit of thinking out, but by having the template and carefully following the template, you'll be able to check you've got it right. Then I can just turn the edges under. I'll give these a seam allowance, turn the edges under, stitch them all around, and then I will stitch the squares together according to this template, and I'll stitch them together with a kind of a whip stitch, but a loose-ish whip stitch, so that it will still form a hinge. I could also experiment with doing an actual hinge, like a little hinge made out of a piece of tape or fabric or ribbon or something. That could work as well, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. I'm going to take this a step further still. What I've done is I've cut out 24 little squares. In fact, I think I've got 25 there, because I've got 12 here, 4, 6, 8, 12. So I've got 12 squares on that side, 12 squares on this side, so I need 24. I've cut them at 8 centimetres square because I want my finished squares to turn out to be 6 centimetres. What size are these? Yeah, these are actually 6 centimetres. I've also cut 24 squares of thin card. You could use cereal box card for this. I just happen to have a lot of this card to use. And what I'm going to do, decorate each square. So let's say this is the number. So this one is going to be number 2. So it's this one. Make sure that square looks exactly like I want this square to look. I've cut it so I've got a seam allowance. This is a 6 centimetre square. I've given myself a little seam allowance, and then I will turn this in, and I'll probably press it with an iron. Then I will do exactly the same thing for the facing square, and I'll turn the seam allowance under for that as well, and then I will put the 2 together and whip stitch them all the way around so that I've got all of these squares. Really hoping that's making sense. It's making perfect sense in my head, but it's quite hard now I've sat down and I'm trying to explain it. I think what might help to explain it and to make it easier for me to follow later on is if I actually write on here what I'm going to need on each side of this. So for this square, I keep looking at this one. This is number 2, and that's the centre point. And then on the other side of it, it needs to be number 4 that way up, and that's the centre point. So I will work my way around and do that. Do a little square of card for each of these squares. So here it's going to be 2, the centre point is there, and on the back, making sure I turn it the same way, I'll put the X. So I know I just want a plain piece of calico there. That's that. So I've done that one, I'm just going to put a little mark here so I know those are done. So I'll work my way around and do little cardboard squares for all of those, and I will then double check that I've got everything right and the right way around. So once I've got my little cardboard squares done, probably the way I will do this, to think to myself, okay, this is page number 2. I'll decide which fabrics I want, and I'll lay those down. I'll decide if I want a circle. I'm loving circles at the moment. I might just do circles, or I might do a heart shape. Also love hearts. And I'll lay those all out. I'll do that for each of the 4 pages. And then when I pick up, then I'll do one cardboard square at a time, and I'll think, okay, I need page number 2, I need page number 2, and I need the one where this is the centre. So I know it's this one. So whatever I've put on here for that part of page number 2, I will put on here. It might be easier to just turn all of the seam allowances under all of the squares, and then I can pick up that one from number 2, corresponding one from number 4, put them together. Actually, this one was just the X, wasn't it? So this would just be a plain one on the back. Yeah. Okay, so now I've got to that point. I just wanted to film that bit first, because now it's probably going to take me a couple of days to put together 4 sets of squares ready to assemble. So I think I'm going to do that, try and get it to the point where I'm ready to assemble the book, and then I will come back and show you the next step, and I'm hoping it will then all fall into place and make perfect sense. I thought I'd give you a quick update on where I've got to so far. I'm still at the experimental stage with this, and I've sort of rethunk again just a little bit. So what I started doing was putting together, this was going to be one of my pages. It could be any one of, it could be 1, 2, 3 or 4, it doesn't really matter at this point. I cut my 4 squares out. I've been pulling things out of, hang on, I've got this little pile of beautiful things I picked out of the most recent Bazaar scrap packs. I pulled out these beautiful shades of, they don't really come across very well on screen. This is a much more greeny colour, a bluish green. So is this. It looks quite blue on the so it looks nice on the camera, but it doesn't really do it justice. It's got a lovely green hue to it. This is a warmer green as well, more of a leafy green. So when I finish the project, what I'll do is I'll have to post photos as well. This is really turquoisey, but they all go beautifully together, and with bits of purple in there as well. And I've got a stash of, I've got some cheapish sewing threads that are working out really well so far. I'm going to test them a little bit longer, and if they're all right, I'll share a link to them, because they were so reasonable to buy. I haven't tried them on the machine fully yet though, so I've got some other, here's this little cotton that Christine sent me. I think this came from Jen, and these beautiful Steph Francis space dyed threads. I think they're just going to be gorgeous. So these are my kind of colours from the project. Got some ordinary embroidery flosses as well in one of my little useful pots. these are little pots. They're little pots that I made. They stack together. I made them out of empty these things, empty rolls. I'll try and remember to leave a link to them, because they're proving so handy. I love that it just stack. I mean, they don't lock together. They just stack really nicely, and they're just made with scrap fabrics, leftovers and things. Really handy. I use them for all sorts of things. I've got my cards all cut out there. So yeah, this is everything I'm using. I've got all my squares. So I started putting together what will become my page 2. The first thing I did was cut the 4 squares in coordinating fabric. I want to make it, I'm going to make each of my pages basically the same design. They're going to have 4 coordinating, but not exactly the same squares. I wish the camera would show these beautiful colours better. This is a gorgeous emerald green, and it changes as you turn it in the light. Absolutely scrummy, these fabrics. This piece that came in the Bazaar scrap pack, absolutely gorgeous, love it. Anyway, and then there's going to be a circle on each of the pages. There's just going to be a circle which I will embroider into, and I don't want each of the squares to be the same. So you'll see it will look like a circle, but each quarter of the circle will have a slightly different design. That's going to be the design for each of my pages, and I want them to kind of coordinate and all look nice together. So I want to use all of those scraps that I've pulled out, because they all go nicely together, but I don't want any of the pages to be the same. I want to be kind of cohesive but not the same, if that makes sense. I've got to leave the space in between to allow for the folding, and I think looking at it now, it makes me think it would be nice to use for the base fabric, to use a coloured fabric, something that you've dyed maybe, or just a plain coloured cotton, something like that, because I'm not sure that I like this kind of off-white colour. I will probably carry on working into them and do more of this kind of stitching around the edges as well, because I don't think that's going to interfere with the folding too much. I'm going to experiment and do it and let you know. So that's what I did first. I cut out the pieces, then I took each square, I turned the edges in. I decided to turn all of the edges of the squares in before I put them together back to back, and just tacked the pieces on. So you see, this is how far I've got with this one. Once they were tacked on, I then did some straight stitching just across in a coordinating colour. I just used one of those machine threads I've just shown you for that. And then I started working into it, adding more stitching like these. And then I will go on and add more around the edges. The idea initially was I was going to do all of my fancy squares, mark them on the back that, you know, this is for page 2 or whatever. And then when they were all completely done, then put them together. Then I wanted to know if, will I still be able to stitch into them once the cardboard is inside, is sandwiched in the middle, and I've got the other side on. And yes, it is. And of course it gets over the problem, because before I was saying you can't just put your fabric on, say this was on part of this, and start doing all your fancy stitching into it on here. It will come through. So you've got to do all of the fancy stitching on the fabric first and then apply it to the base square. But of course with the cardboard in between, that's not a problem. You don't have to go through the cardboard. You can still stitch, but just stitch into this top layer. So I thought I'd try it out, and actually it's fine. I did all of this bit and this bit once I put the two squares together with the cardboard in between. So I feel like that's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to have a slight change of tack. What I'm going to do now, get all of the fabric squares done, pencil on whatever number they need to be in the right direction, pencil on my centre marking, just following each of these squares. So I don't even need to have the template there, because I've already marked everything out on these squares. So I've got another one here that needs to have just the plain one for where they're going to attach on one side, and a 4 that way up on the other side. Okay, so let's say I'm going to now do this square. So I'm going to copy this exactly as it is. So on the other side, I'll be putting this square. It doesn't matter which way up this one goes, because it's just what I think of as the glue side. So I now need to attach those together back to back with the cardboard sandwiched in between. Press them all round like this. There we go. Now I've marked the lines out, I can just press them a bit more firmly. Get my pressy stick out again if I want to. Go around like this with both squares. I could probably just put them together like this and attach the two together, but I think to make life easier on myself, I'm going to just do a quick straight stitch around each of these. There we go. I've just done a really rough tacking stitch on both of those. So this is the square I'm going to be covering. There's my 4. Say I was going to do this square. I've got the 2 on one side and I've got the 4 on the other side, and I need to make sure I get them exactly the same way up as they are there. So there's the 2 with the centre marked there. Then I want my 4 with the centre marked there. So there's the 2. If I turn it over, the 4's that way up. So I can now put those two together and just check. There's the 2, turn it over, there's the 4. So that's how I need to put them together. So I will sandwich that piece of card in the middle, turn my edges under and whip stitch all around. So you can see there, you can see my initial straight stitch where I've gone all around the square to turn the edges in, and then I've just done a whip stitch there to join the two layers together. So I'm now going to do that with all of my squares till I've got all of these squares done according to my original template. So now I've got my little pile of calico pieces, I've got my little pile of cardboard squares. I'm going to work my way through until all of these have got there, have been covered with fabric, and then I'll be back. Well, I've finished attaching all the squares of fabric to my cards, so I'm ready to lay them out according to my template now. So these are the ones where I had already put my fabric, my decorative fabric on, and started doing some of the extra stitching. What I realised as I was doing it, so you can see when I make these projects up as I go along, they tend to evolve. What I realised was I won't any longer know which page number this was meant to be. I have to have a way of remembering which page number this was going to be. So what I ended up doing is putting these little stickies on to say this is page number 3, and it's the top left hand corner. Oops, here we go. Page number 3, and that indicates top left hand corner. This is page number 3, top right hand corner. Overall, now I've played around with the idea for a bit, I think the best way to do this is going to be to do what I've done here, put them all together, stitch them all together to the point where it's the flat layout, then do the stitching on them, and finally fold them up like I showed earlier on. I think that's going to be the best method, but I think there are just so many different ways you could do this. It also occurred to me that because I was concerned that I've got this white area around here, and I will probably cover that with more stitching, I could also put the whole thing together with the colourful fabric that I've dyed or something. And it just occurred to me that now if I'm going to do them like this as separate squares, they don't all have to be done in the same calico base fabric, do they? I could just use anything. And I've got this here that was in amongst the scraps that I could just as well have just used this. In fact, I still could. I could just do an overlayer. I think, although you need to be careful to leave the edges free so that they will fold, I do think as long as it's only a thin layer, I can take the decorative fabric closer to the edge than I have here, and it will still fold all right, as long as I don't make my joining stitching too tight. So I know that these are all number 3, and obviously they've got corresponding numbers on the back there. So I'm now just going to put all of these together according to my template. So I've got this off here to one side, and I'm just going to follow this template. So pick up this square first. It's number 4, and it's the one where the corner, where the centre is up here, pointed towards this corner. So it's this one. So it goes there. Here's another number 4, that's this one, because you can see the centre is there. I'm now just going to double check that it looks right with my template. See, it might look a bit befuddling to start with, but just stay calm, carefully check, turn each one over in the same direction, and just make sure all correct. And now what I'm going to do is take 2 at a time and start stitching them together. And what I'm going to do is a whip stitch, the same as I did, just an overhand stitch. But I'm not going to pull it too tight, because I want it to open out nicely. A bit like when we did the bajagi not long ago, or bajagi. Whip stitch the pieces together, but then you have to open them out flat. So you have to just not pull those stitches too tight so that they will hinge. I could experiment with creating a little hinge with a piece of ribbon or another little strip of fabric to hinge them together, but I don't want to. I might experiment with that at another time. I think this is going to be my favourite way of doing this project. Put them all together like this first, leave it out flat, then I'll plan each page, each set of 4 squares. I'll cut my scraps out to fit, tack them onto each square and do all of the decorative stitching while it's flat, and then eventually I'll fold it up. That'll be the last thing I'll do, is to assemble the whole thing together. This is going to be another video that's kind of more of the technical kind of foundation work really, and not so much the fun colourful stuff. So the last video, the next one I do for this project will be the last one, where we'll get into the more colourful fun stuff. Okay, so let's take these two. I'm going to start working from here. Put them together, make sure I get the right edges together. Put a knot in, which I'm just going to leave on the outside for now, but I'll cut that off later, or we'll hide it underneath the decorative fabric. I'll just start myself off with a couple of double stitches. Put needle back through the loop to make a knot. So I'm just going to take small stitches like that. I'm sorry, the lighting is all over the place. I'm not pulling them at all tightly, can you see that? I'm pulling the thread all the way through but not making it too taut. It's just allowing it to hinge back and forth. That's possibly even a little looser than I need to be, so I'll tighten that up a little bit. I could do this with one of my embroidery flosses. These are, or one of the colourful stranded cottons that I've got. Okay, I'm just going to pull it a little firmer now, but still not too tight. That seems to be about right. So I'm going to go through and stitch the whole lot together in this pattern. So I'll be back when I'm ready for the next stage. I'm nearly at the end of this video now. Here we go then. I've finished stitching all of that together. They all fold back and forth nicely. I think this is most definitely going to be my preferred way of doing it without adding these first. I'm just going to make the whole thing up like this with all the markings on and work on it flat before I fold it up. But you could definitely make it like this and then fold it up and work on it, in which case you wouldn't need any of these markings because you'd be working into the book already assembled. Or you could work on all of the squares separately and then put them together. I think there are lots of different ways you could do this, but this is going to be my favourite way, and definitely having that thin layer of card in there and the 2 squares of fabric stitched together makes it nice and robust. It functions really well now. So I'm not going to fold mine up, I'm not going to fully assemble mine yet, I'm going to work on it flat. If you wanted to, you would now need to attach these 2 faces together and these 2 faces together. So just fold that up, and I would use a little dab of the Pritt Stick Again glue, some kind of glue stick there just to hold it, to help you. And then I'd stitch there and here and probably along that side as well. Same here, join these 2 together, stitch around there, stitch there and stitch there. Wherever you think to attach them together. You probably could just stitch right through the whole thing around there, but I think it'd be quite hard work, so I wouldn't want to do that. Now this fold is a little bit more tricky, remember, because you've got to make sure you only pick up the 2 layers. I want to attach this face to this face, these 2 X's together. What I won't want to do is include this extra layer. So I would fold that down and I would stitch along there, and then this edge and this edge, but being careful to avoid this one. So I'm not going to include that edge. I'm not going to stitch along there because I want that to be free. So then when I fold, this one now has to attach to that one. Fold that up, and again make sure I don't include this layer, just these bottom 2 layers which have the X's on. So I would stitch along that edge, this edge, and I could just stitch along there as well, just to keep that all together. And then it's done. What I'm hoping is that all the numbers will appear the right way up and all the centres will be in the right place if I've done it right. There's that one I've already started working on. Number 4, we should go back to number 1 now. There we go. Brilliant. Now that's being a little bit wonky there because these 2 surfaces aren't yet fixed together in mine, but once they are, that's going to open really nicely and easily. This is definitely going to be my favourite method. I think that would probably make a nice little thumbnail. It won't fold up now into the small square to put it into a little dinky envelope, but I think what will work nicely is I'll make a little kind of pouch for it to go in with a closure, so that when you open it you can just take it out. Yeah, so but that'll be a bit later on. So I'm going to leave this video here. Next time I'll be starting on the fun, really colourful part. I'll be adding all of the scrap fabrics and these beautiful Bazaar scraps, adding some of these luscious threads and things. I'll dig out some sequins and buttons and stuff that I might add in as well, and start really having some fun with this. I will use these as well, and I've got another one here to try out, so I will still use those. I think those will still be usable, but this is going to be far and away my favourite method, I think, coming out of this. So it's worth all the experimenting, and I'm really looking forward to next time when I can start doing all the fun part. I hope you found that useful or inspiring. If there's anything you didn't understand, please do ask me, and I hope you'll join me next time. It should be one day next week. I'll come back with the next and last video in this little series, which will be adding all the colour and stitching and things. So I'll see you then. Thanks very much for joining me today, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye.